Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Professional Standards Forum for 2021 on Trust and Confidence, Responding to Community Expectations. We're delighted to have a full house in our Zoom room today, and we're welcoming councils members from right across Australia, together with the New South Wales Fair Trading Commissioner Rose Webb, the Chair of the Consumers Federation of Australia, Gerard Brody, and members of their executive, esteemed representatives of professional associations and members of the professional standards community. We're going to have an acknowledgement of country presented to us courtesy of the ABC Me television producers, so that we can acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands across all of the states and territories from which you are joining us.
Acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of lands, waterways and skies across Australia. From Mulgana country in the west to Bundjalung country in the east, from Lutruwita in the south to Saibai Island in the Torres Strait, this continent is home to hundreds of different nations whose knowledge has helped shape and evolve our understanding of the land and seas. Today, we pay respect to elders past and present and recognise the contribution of all First Nations peoples to the land we live, learn and play on. Have a deadly day.
What a wonderful way to commence proceedings for the Professional Standards Forum, connecting with community and talking about trust and confidence. Welcome one and all. We will commence the program with a poll, and then we will move into our first speaker, Andrew Lumsden, a leading lawyer from Cause Westgarth Chambers and the Deputy Chair of the Councils, followed by Lauren Solomon, the CEO of the Consumer Research Policy Centre, and then Kristen Weidel, one of our professional standards regulators from the Chartered Accountants Australia, New Zealand. We'll then take a break and come back for our workshop session with Peter Gartland, the independent chair of the Consumer Advisory Panel with the Australian Finance Complaints Authority, and Jane Eldridge, the New South Wales State Manager for the Australian Health Practitioners Regulatory Agency. And we'll close at about 1 o'clock this afternoon. Our first poll, if we can go to that now, is really just to invite you to share your experience with consumer and community engagement approaches in your association or with associations that you have worked with. You'll see that popping up on your screen now. The question is, which of the following consumer and community engagement approaches do you currently use or have you seen being used? We invite you to identify which of those possibilities you've seen, either research in consumer sentiment or consumer needs, consumer-facing resources, particularly on your websites, the use of advisory panels, or potentially partnerships with consumer organisations. And we look forward to seeing which of those engagement methods are commonly being used, and then we'll hear some insights from our panel presenters. So we'll just give you an opportunity, a few more, to be able to identify which you currently use or see being used by occupational or professional standards regulators. And it's multiple choice. So if you see or use one or more of those methods or approaches, please choose multiple responses. And I think we're just about there with responses. So let's have a look at the results and see where our efforts are focused. And we see there that the leading method for community engagement across the associations currently is in consumer needs or sentiment research. followed closely by consultations with consumers. And that's terrific to see that those methods are being deployed across associations, and we'll hear of some further methods and opportunities to develop those engagements from our presenters today. So we might close that poll now, and we will move to our first speaker. I'm delighted to introduce you to our Deputy Chair of the Professional Standards Councils, Andrew Lumsden. Andrew, I'll invite you to put your video on now and to move to your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. As the Deputy Chair, it's my pleasure to present to you today on behalf of the Professional Standards Council. At the heart of professional standards legislation are the interests of consumers, as they are also at the heart of each profession. It's their promise to serve the public and the public good. This year's forum is focused on how occupational and professional associations can build and maintain trust and confidence through effective standards regulation that is responsive to community expectations. As the then Attorney General John Hannaford said in New South Wales Legislative Council in 1994 during the second reading speech for the first Professional Standards Act in Australia, the government wishes to make certain that it is able to provide the protection the community needs and to increase the professionalism of those who provide services within the community. We want the professional standards community to be able to respond to the government and community expectations for effective regulation of professional behaviour, for professions with a focus on continuous improvement, and for occupations with a focus on setting and lifting their standards of practice and skills. Today, you will hear insights from my distinguished colleagues on the panel from a research and an association perspective, and I very much look forward to their presentations on how and why consumer engagement is required to build and maintain community trust and confidence in the professions. To set the scene, I'll be sharing the Council's insights from a regulatory perspective on the ways in which the associations can better connect with the community and to set and enforce professional standards that are trust building. Professional standards legislation remains a unique and highly effective regulatory model operating across Australia. And one of the reasons the national system of professional standards regulation has proven successful is the ability for the councils and professional associations to work together to respond to an ever-changing landscape in the delivery of services to consumers. We do this with a focus on three core areas of operation. Firstly, protecting consumers through the improvement of professional standards, and thirdly, by helping associations to improve their integrity systems and regulatory capacity. As the United Kingdom's Professional Associations Research Network has found out through its professional body sector reviews, widespread support for trustworthy professionalism generated for individual professions can act collectively as a form of social infrastructure for society. In our view, the national system of professional standards regulations can be likened to an agreement between the associations that regulate their members and the community, a social compact, a compact which requires the profession to actively pursue strategies that will improve standards and make professions more accountable to the community. This regulatory relationship is an integral part of the professional social license to operate. And what this means is that the regulatory environment forms part of the conditions on which the community rests its approval or a broad social acceptance of the role of the professions and their unique position of authority. An association's role in a profession's social license to operate requires an ongoing dynamic relationship between the association and consumers in the regulation of their members' competence and conduct. Through this engagement and responsiveness, associations contribute to the legitimacy, credibility, and trustworthiness of their members and of the profession as a whole. As this slide graphically illustrates, there is no shortage of evidence that consumers expect to be heard in relation to the standards of service they receive. And there is no doubt that as as to the consequences for service providers when consumers are not heard and their expressions not met. We see this in the 2021 Edelman Trust Barometer report, where globally 68% of consumers agree that they have power to force corporations to change their operating and behavioural ways. In Australia, this rises to 73%. Consumers clearly expect to have a seat at the table to influence the quality and standards of service they receive. Furthermore, in Australia, 72% of people agree CEOs should take the lead on change rather than waiting for governments to impose change on them. This indicates a strong demand for community responsiveness and an expectation that leaders speak up and step forward on issues in relation to the matters of importance to the communities they serve. From a practical standpoint, the community needs and expectations should be at the forefront of an association's regulation of professional standards. Professions at their core have a requirement to put the public interest above their own interest. Community trust and confidence placed in a profession will be undermined and potentially lost if individual members of the profession fail to uphold standards and accountability that gives an occupation or a profession its special standing. It is said that the social license to operate is hard to win and easy to lose. Understanding the elements of social license to operate can help us focus our regulatory efforts on the drivers of trust and confidence in professions and professionals. The Ethics Centre identifies these three concepts that are required to operate on a social license: legitimacy, credibility, and trust. Legitimacy. This is the extent to which an individual or organisation plays by the rules of the game. That is, the norms of the community, be they legal, social, cultural, formal, or informal in nature. Credibility. This is the individual or company's capacity to provide true and clear information to the community and fulfill commitments made. Trust. This is the willingness to be vulnerable to the actions of another. It is a very high quality of relationship and takes time and effort to create. Each of these components are integral to the work and aims of a professional association. Professional associations are traditionally formed to establish legitimacy of their members within a specialised field. Professional associations seek to warrant the competence and integrity of their members to act in the interests of their clients. They profess to serve the public interest and a common good. In return, governments and the community give professions a privileged and authoritative position in the society in which they operate. The social license is a sentiment shared across the community and indicates how healthy the profession's standing is within that community. It is comprised of perceptions of the legitimacy and credibility of the profession and the presence of trust. The research suggests that the components are granted sequentially by cumulatively building towards the social license. The professions must be seen by the community as legitimate before it can be seen as credible, and both must be present before trust can be established. Let's now turn to how the social license to operate appears in the public domain using trust as a measure. The 2019 Ipsos Global Trust in Professions report provides a picture of the community's trust in various occupations rated by the Australian public. The Trust in Professions survey, completed online by adults aged 16 to 74 in 22 countries across Australia, showed that while the most trustworthy professions varied across countries covered, there is a greater agreement on the professions considered to be untrustworthy. Commenting on the finding, David Elliott, the director of Ipsos Australia Social Research Institute, noted, "It has been said that we are losing faith in experts. This study shows that in fact scientists are held in high esteem by both here and in Australia. The high levels of trust placed in many professions of crucial importance in our society are encouraging, as they indicate that we don't think society is completely broken. we still have a lot of trust in many important professions like doctors, teachers, armed forces, and the police. In a report commissioned by the councils titled The Value of Contemporary Associations, UNSW's Justine Rogers and Deborah Hartstein answer one of the most difficult in a series of questions regarding professional associations, including what is the value of professional associations to the good that professions do? And what do professional associations achieve that state regulation or leaving it to the market alone could not do? This report is available in our research library at the Council's website, and I commend it to you. The report finds that professional associations directly and indirectly protect consumers of professional services and support the advancement of professions as a whole. This protection is clearest in association standard setting and continued training for competence, productive, ethical, and empathetic professional service delivery. It's also clear in professional associations' work to deal with consumer complaints and to discipline their members. When sectors lose the trust and confidence of the public and are called on to be more professional because of poor conduct or low public service commitment, Rogers and Hartstein suggest that it may be these associations' contributions and the association's general support for the professions that is missing or out of step with community expectations. These losses can threaten the social license to operate and erode the good that professions do. In this way, we would say that the social license to operate rests on high professional standards that are promoted and enforced by associations that are aligned with community expectations. Although not all agree with the concept of social license as being relevant for the professions. For instance, Michael Pelly in the Financial Review just last month quoted New South Wales Supreme Judge Francois Kunk, who wrote in his capacity as editor in the Australian Law Journal that the social license considerations have no place in legal practice. His Honour reported that as being of the view that lawyers are members of a profession which already has something more enduring and legally binding than a social license in their oath of office. Whatever the utility of social license in other fields of endeavour, it has no place in relation to the practice of law. I suspect, however, that the role and conduct of lawyers, like any other profession, will be tested in contemporary controversies. For the most part, the social license to operate provides a very helpful framework for evaluating a profession and its services in the public interest by reference to communities' current attitude and expectations. So let me now turn to the role and tools of associations in ensuring the legitimacy, credibility, and trustworthiness of their professions through professional standards regulation. Communities' views were recognised as being central to the reform process that led to the professional standards legislation. It was the Trowbridge report that found there was a mismatch between the current state of the law of negligence and the expectations of the community, recommending a review of the law of negligence by a panel including community views. In 2002, a review of the law of negligence was finalised by a panel established by the Commonwealth Government, chaired by Justice David Ip, and including Professor Peter Kane, Associate Professor Donald Sheldon, and Mr. Ian McIntosh. The panel noted in its final report that a consequence of the dearth of hard evidence in the areas in which decisions are called for is that it is the panel's recommendations are based primarily on collective sense of fairness of its members. Certain submissions criticise the makeup of the panel. In particular, they criticise the fact that the panel is not comprised solely of legally trained persons. We have interpreted the mixed membership of the panel as indicating that its task is to draw upon the personal knowledge and experience of all of its members and on their perceptions and attitudes and wishes of the Australian community as a whole. These sentiments are carried forward in the Council's regulation of professional standard schemes. We recognise that associations are able to gain and maintain community trust in the professions by being responsive to the community's expectations in the assurance of competence and ethics of its members. Mechanisms for doing so envisage that the provision of professionals are envisaged in the provision of professional standards legislation. The Council see the potential in the professional standards legislation for associations to increase community engagement in the regulation of associations' members, and at least in the following areas. Code of ethics. As my Western Australian colleagues on Council's Rachel Webber presented to you in last year's forum, one tool for effectively engaging the community is a consumer-centred code of ethics. To be effective, the development and implementation processes of the associations require close involvement of consumers and stakeholders from across the community, as well as the close involvement of those who will shoulder the code's responsibilities and duty. To achieve consensus compliance, the ethical code must attach to the duty bearer's existing moral convictions and reflect community expectations. If you were to think about the code of ethics for your occupational profession or association from a consumer's perspective, how easy would it be to find the code of ethics on your website? How easy would it be for a layperson to read and understand if a practitioner had been behaving unethically? How do you consult with users of your members' services in the development of your code of ethics to ensure an understanding of their needs and expectations? Claims monitoring. The legislation calls for associations to monitor and analyse claims against its members. This informs the association's risk management strategies to enhance professional practices and reduces the risk of negligence and minimises claims for the occupational liability, thereby protecting consumers. The legislation makes provision for associations to establish a committee for this purpose and for the committee to have a membership beyond the association. If you were to think about claims monitoring and risk management for your occupational profession or association from a community perspective, how do you involve consumer voices in claims monitoring and analysis for your association? Are you tapping into community views on risk management strategies and eyes for practice improvements? How could a broader range of interests help improve your ability to address competence and conduct risk? Complaints and discipline. Consumer complaints and member discipline system must be adopted by all associations. Associations must ensure they have procedures in place for handling and resolving consumer complaints. Furthermore, associations must have procedures for disciplining members. The legislation provides a model complaints and discipline code which associations may choose to adopt. That model envisages a committee for implementing these mechanisms. If you were to think about complaints and discipline systems for your organisation, how easy is it for the public to find and use your complaints process? Are community perspectives included in the process? How is public sentiment incorporated into your association's complaints and discipline procedures? Risk management strategies. The association's occupational risk management strategies must be capable of identifying risk and harms to consumers that arise from failures in competency and conduct, and of developing strategies to minimise those risks. Associations must be able to implement, monitor and report on those risk management strategies, the effect of those strategies and any changes to those strategies. If you were to think about your organisation's risk management from a consumer perspective, have you a clear and comprehensive picture of your members' consumers and their needs? Do you consult consumers and the community about risk management? Do you monitor and report on the effect of risk management strategies in relation to consumers and community expectations? From a council's perspective, these are some of the starting points for invoking values, principles and standards that promote the delivery of the occupation social goods. The things it does that make people's lives better and mitigate risks to consumers, consistent with the attitudes and wishes of the Australian community as a whole. I look forward to hearing from our workshop presenters later this morning on their practical experience in building some of these mechanisms into their regulatory systems for legal services, financial services, and the health professions. Associations' active and continuous engagement with the community through public consultation when applying for a scheme, reference group committees, complaint systems, and general feedback avenues enable them to understand the expectations of their community, including the most outspoken or marginalised voices. The conscious engagement of concerns and ideas raised by community support professions to continuously improve occupational standards and consumer protections. Community engagement facilitates the legitimacy, credibility, and trustworthiness of the profession. The councils encourage you to incorporate more and better community engagement into your association's professional standards improvement program and the operation of your professional standards scheme. In this way, we look forward to working with you to deliver better outcomes for consumers in the community through improved professional standards across each of the occupations you represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. That was a wonderful setting of the scene from the Professional Standards Council's perspective, and I can see already some threads that will emerge in our discussions through this morning, including, as Philip put into the chat, function around trust and trustworthiness, and how do you ensure that the standards of an association build trustworthiness with the community. I'm delighted now to welcome Lauren Solomon to the presentation panel. Lauren is the Chief Executive Officer of the Consumer Policy Research Centre and has a long and outstanding career in policy across corporate, government and not-for-profit sectors, and has led some very rich research through the Consumer Policy Research Centre into consumer expectations and community engagement.
Okay, I think I've got the controls now. Thanks, Roxanne, for that introduction. Look, I'm really pleased to be here today, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we meet on, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I think it's been a really interesting few years, and particularly undertaking research with consumers during COVID-19 and into recovery. It's clear across our community that we're seeing quite significant shifts in terms of consumer expectations, their needs, and obviously quite acute needs in some circumstances for people who've done it really tough during COVID-19. And so the lens through which I look at this is we've got an opportunity here in recovery. We can build back stronger as a community if we're doing it in the right way. We can make our markets fairer and safer and more inclusive. And as a result, if we work together on those things, I think we can actually build a much stronger economy and a community as a result. I think we've got to do the verbal slides, Emily. Thank you. So CPRC's mission is reimagining markets to create a better future for all consumers. We undertake research independently at the centre. We also do it in partnership with others. We look at the performance of policy frameworks, and we conduct research specifically to explore the experiences and expectation of consumers, and usually across essential service markets is where we focus our work. The outcomes that we want to achieve is that we want policies and regulations to be developed, tested and implemented and evaluated with consumer experiences and expectations in mind. We want market and regulatory interventions to ensure that they're not amplifying or creating vulnerability across the community. And we want businesses to be innovating. And we want them to be innovating in a way which is actually improving consumer outcomes and delivering to consumers' needs. And that's why we look at those aspects of competition and regulatory design to ensure that that's the areas where we're seeing really strong innovation and really strong competition between companies. And the other thing we do is direct outreach to consumers through education and training programs. We specifically do a lot in energy in this space, and we wanted to ensure that consumers are actually empowered to access the beneficial products and supports in marketplaces. So for us, policy reform doesn't end when there's an announcement. It ends when the benefit actually reaches the consumer's hands. And so we look a lot at, well, how can we connect what is good in theory to ensuring that it gets to consumers through the right channel with the right communication to ensure that they're able to actually receive the benefits as well. Next slide. So the gap that we often see between consumer expectations and lived experiences, it can come as a shock. I myself spent about 5.5 years working in one of Australia's biggest energy companies, and I am familiar with different types of consumer research that's often undertaken and consumer experience research. I know that research can tend to trend from something that's incredibly insightful and incredibly powerful if it's positioned within businesses and industries to drive change. I've also obviously seen research that's not necessarily going to give a full picture to businesses about what's going on for their consumers as well. And so, you know, it is important when you're designing research that you're really clear about what you're trying to understand about consumers and their experiences and their expectations, and how it connects to the processes and the systems and the tools that you either directly have control over or you're regulating. Next slide, Emily. So I just jotted down some key themes and key expectations that we see time and time again in our research across markets. And so, you know, what consumers expect is not going to be earth-shatteringly surprising. And really, when you step back and think about it, it's things that we all expect from our engagement and interactions with a whole range of different parties across the community. Consumers obviously expect that their safety isn't going to be put at risk. They want to receive fair treatment. When they're calling for assistance and support, that they want to be heard, they want to be respected, and they expect a prompt response, and that's certainly not always the case. They expect to be free from exploitation, you know, so the sorts of practices that businesses are pursuing are not about really profit gouging, but looking to enhance consumers' well-being and welfare. They want to be able to access genuinely useful information that's actually been designed with and for them, not really for legal compliance purposes. We often see this come up quite a lot in qualitative research that we do, where people just feel a lot of the information that's provided to them has just been really a ticker box exercise undertaken to meet regulatory and legal compliance. It's not actually used as a tool to genuinely engage or enhance understanding of consumers and empower them with agency. And that's definitely not the right way to go about it. Consumers also want agency to make their own choices, and they want freedom to change their minds without significant unfair penalties as well. And so that obviously goes to that heart of when they get information where they're able to make informed choices, do they have the agency to act on that and not be penalised if they do change their minds in an unfair way. And the last one as well that comes up obviously is that people really do need to be able to resolve complaints and access remedies easily and swiftly and fairly when things go wrong, and certainly across a number of industries that is not the case. It's often very time consuming, it's very complex, it's very it's just very costly for consumers to engage with those processes if they have the agency and the funds available often to pursue that as well. So where we've seen significant gaps between expectations and conduct, obviously we're all familiar with the Banking Royal Commission. Look, there's a range of issues that have come up through those deliberations that are just quite awful, and I think we're all aware that that some of the conduct we've seen there is just not the sort of conduct we want in our community and we want in our economy. The other markets where we've seen similar sorts of significant gaps is in aged care, and I think, Emily, we've got that next slide coming up. And so obviously significant implications for safety there, for mental health issues, for financial exploitation, and really low levels of trust in the aged care industry as well. You know, I think when we really look at a lot of these sorts of issues that are emerging, it does go to the extent to which we think about care and how we value care within our economy and within our markets. And it certainly suggests that at the moment, our markets often are not doing a good job of actually delivering that. And that's telling us something really important, I think, in the medium and the long term as well. Housing, so obviously a significant number of issues have emerged in the housing sector. You know, home, it's the safest place we seek during our lives. It's our place of rest and relaxation, and our sanctuary. And it's sometimes the biggest investments for consumers who can afford it that they'll make in their lifetimes. But what we've often seen really across the nation, I mean internationally as well, is many years of poor industry practice and significant power and information asymmetries between industry and consumers, but also failures in regulatory design and enforcement. And that's really resulting in, for many people, the fact that their home isn't the safe haven that it should be. You know, that's creating really significant you know, risks across the nation, and it's adding costs, not only financial costs of remediation, but the mental health and stress costs associated for many people that are involved. So one of my roles is also over the past year being a member of the panel working on Victoria's building system review. So I've learned a lot about that sector over the time relative to other essential service markets, and I guess this market really has stood out through time as one that needs much stronger systemic representation of consumers within it, much stronger transparent reporting of consumers' experiences, so that we can actually track the impact of the regulatory framework and business conduct, and so that industry itself knows how that it can improve practices. What I'd also say is that it's an incredibly complex market. So both the policy framework and the product itself is high in complexity, and that can make it extremely difficult for consumers to navigate, and why you can't rely solely on notions of informed choice in this market. What we often see in very complex and essential service markets is that we do need strong minimum standards to meet expectations, basic expectations that place appropriate responsibility on industry to ensure that the products are fair and that they are safe. We also generally look at things like removing systemic complexity for consumers navigating those markets, so that we can increase their agency and their comprehension as well. We also need strong and effective consumer representation and easy and effective ways to seek and access remedies when things go wrong. And so those characteristics are nothing unique to complex and high risk, high impact markets where things go quite wrong if appropriate protections are in place. And so I'm really looking forward to continuing those discussions and deliberations with the panel. These are all things that we've been discussing over the past year, and we've got our next phase of work coming up on those reforms. So just to the next slide. So why should we care? Everyone should care when we have a really significant gap between expectation and reality for consumers' lived experiences. Just the next slide. As Andrew mentioned before, it's trust. Trust is just fundamental to the functioning of markets. Philosopher Honora O'Neill, who delivered the Reith Lecture in 2020, turned to Confucius on the question of trust. So Confucius told his disciple Tenzin that the three things are needed for government: weapons, food, and trust. If a ruler can't hold on to all three, he should give up weapons first and the food next. Trust should be guarded to the end. Without trust, we cannot stand. She argues it's hard to build trust directly, and that we should be aiming to build trustworthiness, components of which are honesty, reliability, and competence. And all of those things are central to good customer service. I won't spend too much time on this because it was mentioned before, but obviously we take a look at the Edenwin Trust Barometer almost every year, and some of the sectors that I mentioned earlier are obviously at the moment and have been for some time towards the bottom of that index. And if consumers don't trust the information and products and services within the market, they don't have confidence, that has big implications not only for industry but the whole economy. So as we're recovering from COVID-19, rebuilding consumer trust in a number of markets really should be a central focus of governments. The next slide. So the Australian Consumer Law Survey tries to quantify the costs of consumers trying to resolve problems, and it turns out that's actually a really big number. $16.31 billion over 2 years was estimated for consumers, the cost to consumers, both of the direct cost of the problem, but then the time cost of trying to resolve them across essential service markets, or sorry, across all markets. And also, I should point out that this number doesn't actually include the cost of people who did not take action. So people who just gave up and did nothing and lived with the problem that they had. So this has a significant economic cost, and one of the reasons why it's a problem for everyone. The next slide. Some of the research we did at CPRC over the last 8 months of the last year was looking at the impacts of COVID-19 and business conduct across essential service markets, and the extent to which consumers were actually able to access support measures and switch products and access concessions, and also the extent to which businesses were actually reaching out to them to give them support as well. What's really important is that business conduct and the operation of markets, it's not that people just have vulnerabilities going into crises like COVID-19. What can happen is that those vulnerabilities are actually amplified and new vulnerabilities are created because consumers cannot access the support measures that they need or that they're eligible for, or they're pushed further behind by industry practice. And what this slide goes to is that our culturally and linguistically diverse consumers across the nation had far greater negative experiences than the average population across all providers. And when we were looking at what sort of negative experiences they were encountering, it was often they couldn't understand how to contact the provider, they couldn't resolve the issue, couldn't navigate the website, the wait times were long, received unhelpful service, or they might have felt they'd been misled by the information provided. Next slide. So what happens, we see significant and rapid regulatory intervention usually in these markets, and there's a big effort to recorrect back in line with community expectations. Costs can be significant, not just for industry, but it can be for the whole community as well. Next slide. So we think there's significant value in shining a light on consumer experiences and regularly. It's the sunlight remedy. Next slide. So what we look at a lot is if you can better understand consumer experiences across markets and within your own market. The reason that that's important is that it tells you what you can set as a minimum standard in terms of the expectations that are required, but it also enables competition to actually improve on the customer services and the quality of the products and services that you're competing in markets to deliver for consumers. So the way we look at this is very much that it's always about setting the right minimum standards, but encouraging competition in the right places. And so when you're thinking about how you use that to inform policy and regulatory design, it's for both purposes. Next slide. So what happens when we don't have that information is consumers can end up in the dark, and we end up ultimately with a lack of competitive tension for good products and services. And what we end up with, according to Akerlof, is a market for lemons. So when consumers can't differentiate the difference between a good product or a bad product, then ultimately all you end up doing is creating a market for bad products, because consumers are not able to actually differentiate, and companies are not rewarded when they are actually doing the right things and when they are delivering great service, because there's no difference. And so transparency of the quality of service that consumers are receiving is really important and can be a differentiator for competition. The next one. And the last thing I just wanted to touch on, I think I'm going pretty well for time, is the importance of designing your products, services, regulations and policies inclusively. And that means making sure you're designing them with and for everyone, people with diverse needs, culturally and linguistically diverse consumers, as I mentioned before, consumers living with disabilities. And the reason that you do that is because you can actually increase the benefits, not just for one specific company, but for the whole economy. And so this is some research that was conducted by a Centre for Inclusive Design by PwC. And what they found was in the retail sales industry alone, they estimated that companies could increase their revenue, or the sector could increase its revenue by $4 billion in the household goods and clothing sectors if they were actually designing their products and services inclusive of everyone. And so it makes good business sense, not just good social and inclusion sense, to ensure that we're actually including all consumers and not unfairly disadvantaging or leaving people behind. So that's probably the main thing from me. So thank you. If you want to hear more from us about the research that we produce and the services we provide, you can head to cprc.org.au, and you can also follow us on Twitter. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren, for that very informative presentation and using your words for shining a light on the consumer experience for us today to help inform our discussions about the way in which we can deliver better regulatory services with and for consumers and the community. So very helpful insights there. And I think you've also touched on the issue raised by David Rush, and that is how important is communication in building trustworthiness, and the way in which we approach that communication challenge by providing genuinely useful information designed with consumers, I think is part of the answer. I also know it will be part of what Kristen Weidel addresses for us. Our next presenter is Kristen, the General Manager for Professional Standards at Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. Kristen also represents Chartered Accountants on the Australian Accounting Professional and Ethical Standards Board, and is going to address us on two recent research reports commissioned by the association. And Kristen, I can see you've got your video on there, so I'll hand over to you to present. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Roxanne. And thanks very much to the Professional Standards Council for organising these days. I've been involved with the PSC since 2014, and this is a new initiative, and I really support it. I think it's a great way to share different views and different points of view. But to trust. We can go to the next slide. So today I'm just going to cover off on three areas. And was asked by Roxanne to talk to Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand's papers that we prepare or we commission. So the first one that I'll speak to is our 2019 paper, The Future of Trust, New Technology Meets Old-Fashioned Values. Then I'm going to link that in with our second paper, which is the 2020 paper on the 21st century professions. Not all of that links into trust, but I've managed to find some good crossovers. And then lastly, to sort of bring it back to my day job, trust at Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand, and what we're doing as a professional association to increase the level of trust that consumers can have in the work of our members. And a small disclaimer, I'm not the author of these papers. I'm a user and a summariser. So if anybody wants to talk in depth about them, I'd be very happy to connect you to the authors. Okay, on we go. So what is trust? Trust, very simply, is when one party relies on another to behave in a certain way. There's got to be two elements, risk and interdependence. The risk is present because there is an uncertainty as to how the other party will behave, and then an interdependence because we're reliant on the other party to fulfill their part of the arrangement. If there's a deviation from what is expected, then there is a violation of trust. This also impacts on future behaviour. And if any of you who are parents or have been puppy training or even in the dating scene, if you think about, what I do today then creates the expectation of what I will do next time. And there's a reaction from the other party for that. The other, you can see that I'm limited in my design skills. If we look at the triangle, there's four concepts that just are so interlinked, and I couldn't come up with a better picture than a triangle, but, trust, ethics, integrity, and honesty. And as I speak this morning, you'll sort of hear me, and when I talk to, talk to my membership and talk in the organisation, this trust and ethics, integrity, we just sort of pick up and use one interchangeably. To give an example of how that works in the accounting profession, we seek to hold the public interest by the public's trust by having a code of ethics. The code of ethics is based on fundamental principles, one of which is integrity. That's then defined in the code as being straightforward and honest. Tick the honest box in your professional relationships. And so, you know, I'm sure those of you can think about your own professions and those links between the four as well. Trust can be tricky to define, and there's many definitions out there. Theoretical model that we referred to in the paper is that there's four important elements. Competency, so there must be believing the other party has the skills and experience to fulfill their part of the contract. Integrity, believing the other party is honest. Goodwill, one party has confidence that the other party will look after their interests. And lastly, effective communication, which has already been mentioned today. Okay, back to Edelman. All paths on trust lead to Edelman. So this is the 2021 survey from the Edelman Trust Barometer, which showed that Australia's level of trust in government, not-for-profits, media and business all actually continued to increase in 2021. Interestingly, when we wrote our paper in 2019, all the categories were red. So there was no trust in these four areas. And I'm sure there's a number of explanations for why the changes happened. I suspect that there's been a degree of trust, maybe in government in particular, around the way that the COVID crisis was treated. But you know, it could be many factors. The other interesting fact from the Edelman 2021 survey is that Australia had the largest increase of any country in the Edelman Trust Index. We actually went from 47 to 59, which is a position of distrust to trust. So Australians just became more trusting. Okay, next slide. So who do we trust? And it's interesting. I think that Andrew had a different slide of who we trust. This is from the Edelman survey, and we also, when we did our report, we engaged with Edelman Intelligence as well and surveyed 1,500 Australians and New Zealanders to incorporate some additional research. And so on that, doctors, engineers, teachers, police, accountants, the justice system, and then lawyers were sort of the top 5 or so trusted professions. We'd like to see accountants further up there, but you know, we're in the top bands, I suppose. The interesting explanation proffered by the paper for this is that it's when in the ones that are highly trusted, they are generally an expert speaking from their point of expertise. And that gives the expert to allow some greater objectivity in their messaging. So as I was preparing for this, I thought about my time in practice, and as I consulted with my clients, you know, I had a suite of legislation and accounting and auditing standards there to back up my expertise. So that resonated with me. And then the converse is the two lowest ones, which is the religious institutions and political parties. The paper mentions that's, you know, they feel that that's coming from an ideological position, and you would only trust those views if you also shared that ideological view. So I thought that was quite an interesting angle. So how do we enhance trust? This is one of probably to my mind, one of the really valuable parts of the paper. You know, so some tips for enhancing trust. There's a digital distrust. So we need to be careful to make sure that we keep face-to-face business relationships. We keep face-to-face contact with people to enhance trust. The survey showed clients who had less face-to-face interaction with their accountant over a 5-year period actually had lower trust in their accountant than those who saw them. Now, this was even if the accountant was sending them lots of emails, lots of digital connectivity, but they still valued that face-to-face. And we know through COVID, the value of face-to-face is invaluable. You can detect tone, you can detect voice, you can pick up all the other cues and body language. Interestingly, it does say that video face-to-face as we're doing now is the next best thing. But hopefully we can get out and have more face-to-face. Communicate your purpose loudly. While people remain confident in the technical abilities of an expert, our paper showed that people are less confident in the ability of an organisation to provide unbiased advice reflective of their own personal values. This is particularly true for accountants, which represents a trust opportunity. All businesses, including accountants, need clear organisational values and a purpose that goes beyond making a profit. Communicating these values authentically and clearly to current and prospective clients to build trust and connections is important. Focus on fundamentals. Honesty is key, and it's sort of that along with the face-to-face to me is sort of just a really simple reminder of what to do. So the importance of honesty. This mattered very highly with all the survey respondents and so honesty was one of the primary trust concerns at every professional and institution. The resurgence of the expert, leverage your expertise. International research suggests that experts, both technical and academic, are who we trust most. In fact, in a climate of declining trust in institutions, trust in technical experts was found to be rising. If you're an expert in your field, then you should leverage that to gain trust and a competitive advantage. And I'll talk later on about balancing that ethics and expertise because the two have to go together. Your employees are the key to trust, and trust goes both ways. So for those of you in large organisations, it's important to leverage the workforce. They are the ones that are engaging with your consumers day to day, and they're the ones who will either win or lose trust with your consumers. Employees, research supports the notion that consumers trust employees of a brand more than they trust its CEO or executive team. And trust goes both ways. If employees are to trust their employers, then there is an organisational culture of open communication, and that then enhances the employee's ability to raise issues up through the chain. I think about at Chartered Accountants at the moment, we're doing a very large revamp of our entry-level program, and the amount of information that's been given to us so that we understand what's happening, we know what's happening, means that each and every employee can be an advocate. We genuinely believe that this is a great program. And so we can all speak to it with that absolute authenticity. And that then generates trust in the students and so forth that we speak to. Okay, next slide. So what would reduce the level of trust? We could have run I probably should have done a poll because I'm sure we probably would have got similar answers. So in a survey, where the respondents were asked a single action that would reduce the level of trust in certain professions or groups. They were given a choice of answers, but it could also provide free-form answers. And so the slide there shows that, in every occasion, if someone was dishonest, then that would reduce trust. If they behaved unethically, that would also reduce trust. For accountants, the third important factor was if they failed to protect private data. Interestingly, as a response to this research, we've increased the amount of resources and training available to our members around cybersecurity and the like, and data protection, sorry. Not protecting the vulnerable was also seen as an important factor for lawyers and other professions. And then providing high quality goods and services was very important for engineers and doctors. So trust and professional associations. Our 2021 paper, The 21st Century Profession, The Changing Nature of Professions, looks at professions of the future. It is a lot of useful information for associations that, as I say, is outside of today's scope. So I'd encourage you, it's going to be put into the resources. It's well worth a read. What's relevant here is the key way professionals set themselves apart from other occupations is their commitment to the code of ethics. And this comes out very clearly in the paper. A professional designation is seen as a badge of expertise, but others have confidence, our consumers and our clients have confidence that they're dealing with a trusted ethical expert. Again, that link between trust and ethics. The slide here shows the 12 characteristics of a profession that the paper put forward. There's many, many models. We chose the model from British academics Cheetham and Chivers from 2005. The report also, again, talks about this trinity of expertise, ethics, and integrity. And I just keep harping back to that. I took liberties and popped some red ticks there on the ones that I felt overlaid between trust and and what is a profession. You could probably draw a longer story and add a few more ticks in there, but I think it's very clear that trust is just underpinning with professionalism. Interestingly, the Code of Ethics for Chartered Accountants does require us to act in the public interest. All right, so what are the changes needed for 21st century professions? So how can we keep professions, and how can professions stay trusted? I think Andrew raised the social bargain or the social license. If we don't have trust, we can't keep that. So we need to keep strong on ethics and expertise, and the two go hand in hand, as I mentioned earlier. The public expects members to be experts, even more so now when in the sort of the Google age of of Google searches. It's because an expert has the ability to know that to understand information, but also to work in tandem with their code of ethics. Codes of ethics and acceptable professional standards are expected. And a professional association is also expected to take action against members who do not meet those public expectations. I think it's important to rethink how our members learn and remain current. When I first entered professional life, there wasn't an internet sitting on my phone. Well, we didn't have a mobile phone, and I'm showing my age. So I had to hold all the knowledge in my head. Professionals today don't have to hold that knowledge in their head, but they need to be able to apply the ethical lens to understand it and advise on it. There needs to be a strong link. We need to link strongly to purpose. 84% of survey respondents believe professions needed a purpose beyond just making a profit. People expect professions to act in a socially responsible manner and to be culturally and environmentally aware. Professions need to model improved diversity amongst their membership to reflect the society they operate in. We need to have increased transparency. To me, this is probably the most, if I'd ranked these, I probably would have popped this one in a second. To maintain their social license to operate, professions must be more transparent in how they go about their work, what they have considered in reaching their conclusions, and how they've arrived at their recommendations. Professions must do a better job of explaining what they do and how they add value. Transparency is an essential element of any service oriented profession. We need to build and rebuild trust and reputation. And we also need to reconsider entry pathways. Traditionally a profession had a degree and then we had exams. The survey was showing that maybe there's a different way, or maybe there's a better way of selecting people who have the expertise and the ethics without examinations. Though having worked in a professional association, it's really easy to just rely on exams and degrees. So it's a challenge to us as executives in professional associations to look at different ways to have entry pathways. Okay, I'm running short on time, Roxanne, I know. So moving quickly. Next slide. What do we do? What does CAANZ do to maintain trust? We write these papers, and we use these papers to stimulate conversation in the business community and to educate our members about how they can not just do tax, do audit, do accounting stuff, but be better professionals. We're involved in local and international standards setting. Australian accountants operate under standards set internationally. On those international boards, there are consumer members. And so the consumer voice comes through in the standard setting, or there are regulator members at those international boards. So I think that's an important sort of check and balance. The standard setting is actually also overseen by the Public Interest Oversight Board, which is also a very strong check and balance. We include consumers in our CANZ board and in our professional conduct entities. So that also gives us an important consumer voice. We invest in programs to improve professional standards. We have training, websites, articles. We have teams just dedicated to assisting members with their professional standards style related queries. We publish our conduct decisions and we give the complainant, who's the consumer, the opportunity to speak at a case conference. Our decisions are all made in public, they're published on our website, and their decisions published with reasons. So it's very transparent about about how the decisions were made. We have member support programs. We know that mental health can lead to bad ethical decisions, and so we do have a number of ethics and mental health support programs available for members. We do maintain high barriers to entry, and from July 2021, we will be introducing mandatory ethics training of 2 hours every training for our membership. And one of the things that we'll be using for that is our next paper, because I promised my team I'd give it a plug, a paper called Give It a Nudge, which is looking at behavioural learnings for ethics. So that will be happening from 2021, and I'm almost over time, so that was it. Thank you very much. Sorry for the rush.
Perfectly on time, Kristen, and leaving us with a tantalising prospect in your next paper, Give It a Nudge. I'm going to look forward to reading that. Thank you for putting a wonderful lens on the question of consumer engagement and community expectations from the perspective of a professional association and the implications for a profession. That was a wonderful way to bring forward the regulatory perspective from Andrew and the research that was presented by Lauren. So very much appreciated. And I can see that there are some threads coming through each of the presentations and prompting some really interesting questions from our participants today. So let me remind everyone that you are able to raise your questions through the chat function. Our focus for these forums is very much to engage in a conversation with members across the professional standards community. A little more difficult to do that online than when we are present together in a room, and the value and the quality of that communication has been highlighted, I think, in most of the presentations this morning. But don't be daunted. Putting your question or your comment into the chat function will enable us to quickly move to that conversation. While you are warming up to that idea, let me call up our poll. We had the poll at the beginning of the forum, where we asked you what community engagement methods you're using in associations or have seen being used in associations. Now I would like to ask you, having heard from our presenters, where would you be interested to put a focus in advancing community engagement, consumer perspectives in your regulatory systems? And part of asking this question is it will help inform the way in which the councils direct our initiatives to develop resources and to assist associations in being able to bring community engagement and consumer engagement to the fore in regulating professional standards. So Pete, if we can put that poll up on your screens, hopefully everyone can see that, poll 2, and the question is, which one of the following consumer or community engagement approaches would you be most likely to use in the future? And as I say, this will assist us in seeing where the demand might be and directing resources and advice and assistance from the professional standards councils to support you in those endeavours. So we're getting a few responses coming through now. These are the same options and possibilities for you as in the first poll. If you are going to nominate other approaches, it would be terrific if you could put those ideas into the chat function, and that might prompt some discussion and give you some links to work that's already on foot or resources that you might be able to access from our presenters and from other participants here today. So if you are selecting other approaches, then please pop what those ideas are into the chat. This poll, you get to select one, so we really want to see where your priority interest lies. And we're just getting towards completing that poll. So last opportunity as to which area would you like to develop further in your professional standards regulatory systems to better engage with consumers and the community in setting and enforcing standards for your profession or your occupation. And I think we've just reached the full complement there. So Pete, if we can have a look at those results and see which is our top scoring area. And there we've got research on consumer sentiment and needs as 39% of you would be interested in developing that further, together with what have we got here, consultation with consumers at 35%. And then at 29%, consumer advisory panels. Well, you're going to really enjoy the workshop session, I think, after our morning tea break, where we've got Peter Gartland speaking specifically on consumer advisory panels in the Financial Complaints Authority, and Jane Eldridge speaking about consumer advice and consultation in the health practitioner regulatory scheme. So thank you for completing that poll, and let's go to some of the questions and comments coming up in the chat.
Thanks very much, Roxanne, and thank you to Andrew, Lauren and Kristen for the presentations this morning, and for participants for the questions and discussion. I think it's been a great opportunity for us to share ideas and emerging research in the issue of responding to community expectations in relation to trust and confidence. I just had a few takeaways from the various presenters that I'd perhaps just like to share with you. I think Andrew's focus on the social licence really provided a good starting point for us, particularly the requirement for legitimacy leading to credibility and then leading to trust. But Andrew made the point that the social licence was hard to win, but easy to lose. And I think there are probably plenty of organisations that have suffered that fate in recent times. And then Andrew also spoke about the need for community engagement in the 4 key areas where the professional standards councils focus their attention. That is the code of ethics, claims monitoring, complaints and discipline, and then risk management systems. So I think it might provide some further insights for the councils to make sure that we are effective in ensuring that we do engage the community in those areas and the work that we do in relation to them. Then Lauren started her presentation with, I thought it's probably a well-known expression now, but I thought it had real application to the approach that associations might have to ensuring consumer confidence, and that was to build back better. And she said that this was an opportunity perhaps emerging out of the pandemic, and I think she's absolutely right. And I think that the pandemic has perhaps given us an opportunity to have a bit of a think about how we can be more responsive in terms of meeting community expectations. And then she provided us with a checklist, or what I call a checklist of the ingredients of the customer service gap, and highlighted the fact that transparency was the key to ensuring confidence. And I also was interested in her comments about inclusive design as making good business sense. And I think that was a really good point to make. And then Kristen spoke to us about trust and identified the 4 ingredients of trust as she saw it: competency, integrity, goodwill, and effective communication. And spoke to us also about how to enhance trust, and particularly identified a number of areas which we need to be cognizant on, not the least of which was the issue of digital distrust, and focus on the fundamentals, in particularly that of honesty. And also the important thing that we all need to be aware of, and that is that a key ingredient in achieving trust is our employees. And if they don't believe in what they're doing, if they don't see trust within the organisation, they're unlikely to propound it elsewhere. And then also, Kristen also indicated to us that the ingredients for trust were expertise, ethics and integrity, and also then made reference to transparency. So look, I think that from my perspective, it's been a really interesting morning. A lot of consistency in terms of the issues that have been raised, but also some new areas that we might take on board too. So with those comments, could I thank our three speakers this morning, Andrew, Lauren and Kristen, for great presentations, and to thank everybody for your contributions to the discussion, and wish you the best for the rest of the day. Thank you. Thanks, Roxanne.
Thank you, John, and here. Much appreciation to you and to the panel for leading us through the discussion this morning. And that brings us to the end of the panel session. For those that are going to participate in the workshop session, and everyone is invited, we will be taking a 20-minute morning tea break, and don't we have a lot of food for thought to mull over with a cup of tea for the next 20 minutes. We ask you not to leave the forum. If you simply leave your video and microphone turned off and rejoin us at 11 a.m. We will look forward to presentations in the workshop session from Peter Gartland from the Australian Financial Complaints Authority and Jane Eldridge from the Australian Health Practitioner Regulatory Agency. Unfortunately, we will not be joined this morning by the UK Legal Services Board. We were advised on Saturday that as a result of the mourning period in the United Kingdom, all public-facing services of the civil service have been postponed while they are in that mourning period. So unfortunately, we will not be joined by them, but we will have the benefit of a video presentation that we can circulate in coming weeks. In terms of the presentations delivered by Andrew, by Lauren and by Kristen, they will be available on our website in the coming weeks, and they will be accompanied by links to the resources that each of the presenters have referenced. So we invite you to tap into those and to share them within your associations and with your colleagues across the professional standards community. But for now, we wish you a good morning tea and look forward to seeing you again at 11 a.m. Thank you.